All right, joined now by Alex Newman, our international correspondent. Alex, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be with you, Duke.
In South Carolina, the government schools have decided they're going to actually use Black History Month as a way to slip in LGBTQ advocacy. So it's not enough things to talk about with race in this race-obsessed country of ours. We've got to mingle Black History Months with LGBTQ stuff. Talk about that, Alex.
Yeah, so what we found out was that in Spartanburg, in District 7, and this is actually happening across the country, but we just got the emails and the documents from Spartanburg, District 7. They are adding to the Black History Month propaganda the LGBT propaganda. And there's a very subtle connection taking place here. They're trying to teach the children that racism against black people is equivalent to disagreeing with homosexuality or recognizing the fact that people are born and remain either male or female. So they're trying to make opposition to homosexuality, opposition to gender confusion as noxious, as toxic as racism against black people. So that's why they're linking the two together. And we saw some of the documents, some of the PowerPoint presentations that are being used. It's unbelievable. You've got studies of intersectionality and lesbianism and systematic oppression and gender nonconformity and gender fluidity. And again, this is happening to little kids in one of the most conservative states, in one of the most conservative districts in America, Duke.
Yeah, and you know the really shocking thing, I like what you said there. If I were African American, or African Americans that I know, aren't going to be really happy about this. There was a huge battle a couple of years ago when they were trying to manipulate the 1964 Civil Rights Law to just sort of tuck gender confusion and transgenderism into the civil rights legislation. Just kind of quietly slip it in. And a lot of African American leaders were angry that this is a totally different thing. What happened to African Americans by law and by custom, what was done to them is unique in the history of, in some cases, in the history of the world. And what they wanted to do was to make it sound like LGBTQ people were the same boat. They're not. It was really offensive to a lot of African American leaders. And if I were African American, I'd be really bothered by the fact, doesn't the LGBTQ people have their own month? Why are you usurping this here? And slipping it in like this, part of it's actually working against black values, because we know that African Americans have a much less of a tolerance across the board for LGBTQ, for transgenderism. They're among the most conservative racially when it comes to embracing those things. So you're actually taking their chosen month, the month that is dedicated to their history, to work against black values in a very obvious way, to sort of use this as a way of brainwashing black people into your little LGBTQ cult.
That's exactly what's happening, Duke. And it's really ironic. The timing was perfect. The day I was writing this article for Freedom Project Media for the Newman Report, I also received an email from a friend of mine, a black minister, wonderful, wonderful man of God, Randy Short. He's conservative on a lot of issues, progressive on some issues. We see eye to eye on a lot of things. We don't see eye to eye on some things. But he sent me a preview for a new movie that's coming out. It's called Buck Breaking. And I encourage everybody to watch the preview. I linked to it in the article. It's a huge and very diverse coalition of black Americans making the argument that trying to promote homosexuality and gender confusion in the black community is actually an effort of white supremacists. It's a white supremacist plot to destroy the black family, to destroy black men, to confuse black children, and also to reduce the population of black people, because they know that homosexuals don't have children. They know that transgenders who sterilize themselves by mutilating their body or taking a bunch of hormones will not have children. And so they say this is actually direct white supremacy being forced on the black community. I encourage everybody to go watch that little clip, because you need to understand this. This is not anything to do with Black History Month. This is perversion. This is confusion being injected into something where it doesn't belong.
Well, and not only that, the privileged white culture has convinced black women more than any other racial ethnic minority that abortion is the way to go. More black babies murdered than any others. And so when are black people going to realize, black educators going to realize, black activists going to realize that the biggest enemy they face in the whole world is the white liberal? I want to talk about white liberals in response to African Americans after the break. Back again with Alex Newman, and we were just turning the corner. You wrote a great article for the Newman Report about how South Carolina schools, although this is happening all across the country, South Carolina schools, we have evidence that they're using Black History Month, the February, to actually promote values that many African Americans don't like, including a radical LGBTQ agenda. And at the end of our previous section, we talked about how I made the observation, when are African Americans going to realize that the most white supremacists, the most racist people in the country today are progressive, privileged white liberals? It is white liberals who have convinced black women to abort their babies at outstanding rates. It is white women and white progressives, white men and women, who have convinced African Americans that marriage was meaningless, that single motherhood is a norm. It is white liberals for 50 years now who have promised African Americans their support and not given it to them. We look at what Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden, again, catered to African Americans in the primaries, got the huge African American vote. And what has he done so far? He's privileged Native Americans. He's done a lot for Hispanics in his first week. Not a word about anything he's going to do to benefit African Americans. Once again, blacks are left on the plantation by white liberals. When are people going to realize this?
Well, there have been many militant black leaders who have said exactly what you just said, Duke, that white liberals are the most dangerous, the most wicked force when it comes to keeping black people down, keeping black people oppressed. And this is another perfect example of that, right? The data is very clear here. And it doesn't matter what so-called racial group you're a part of. And as a Christian, I even reject the whole concept of race, but it doesn't matter. The best model for a child to grow up in is a two-parent home with a mother and a father. There's nothing that comes even close to that in terms of having good outcomes in life, not committing crime, getting a good job, not being poor in the future. And yet here we have these ridiculous liberals trying to teach them that they should not have family, that they should pick a new gender. It is, I think, a targeted effort to destroy not just black Americans, but all Americans. And it just so happens that they focused in on black Americans first. And we've seen the consequences of that. And you know, when you really break this down, this has been going on for a long time. People like Margaret Sanger, I think, is a perfect example, the founder of Planned Parenthood. One of the things I used to do in college, we used to do pro-life activism, and we would print up these big signs with quotes from Margaret Sanger. She viewed black people as human weeds. She actually started the Negro Project to hire black ministers to go out and convince black women and black men that birth control and having small families and reducing their population was the key to success. And then she even said in one of the letters, we don't want word to get out that we're trying to exterminate the Negro race. Right, and then she would go speak at KKK meetings about how we need to shrink the population of black people. These people are so hypocritical. They're so wicked. And then they have the nerve to call conservatives racist. It's simply grotesque, dude.
Well, and think about the election of Senator Warnock in Georgia, who is a flat-out racist, African-American, speaking the language of Margaret Sanger. He believes, as a quote-unquote Christian minister, he believes that abortion through all 9 months of gestation, up until the baby's born, that is perfectly in the will of God. That is perfectly biblical. You're now getting black politicians who are Margaret Sanger acolytes. It's remarkable when you think about this, contributing to the destruction of black unborn babies. Staggering. And Georgia, of all states, went for that kind of nonsense. Shows you how powerful white liberals' control over these kinds of thought is. And when you go back a little bit, we're an education podcast. And you know, the one thing you didn't mention is, for 60 years now, white progressives, white liberals have been in charge of every aspect of American education. And you and I both know that no one suffered more under that liberal progressive regime than African Americans. Asians are doing great. Hispanics are doing better vis-a-vis blacks. Immigrants, Hispanics, are doing better. Why is it that under radical leftist control of education for 60 years, the one group that stays mired at the bottom is African Americans?
It's all by design, Duke. And in fact, in the book that I co-wrote about 6 years ago now with Dr. Sam Blumenfeld, who studied the American education system for 60 years, we have 2 chapters explaining what white liberals did to the black community using the indoctrination system masquerading as a public school system. It is an atrocity. It is a crime of massive proportions. That's why one of the reasons we call the book Crimes of the Educators. And I think people need to be held accountable, or this evil, this suppression of our people is going to continue for the foreseeable future.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Most of you know our show is being censored by big tech.
While this makes it harder to meet the cost of producing the show, that's part of it. It also demonstrates that we must be having tremendous success, or they wouldn't bother to try to shut us down.
If you like hearing truth and common sense with a love for freedom, please join the Patriot Club with a one-time $99 tax-deductible donation. And you'll get this sweet vessel of joy as part of a thank you for joining the Patriot Club.
Etched with the American flag and the words freedom never tasted so good.
All you have to do is visit patriotclub.us and become a Patriot member today.
That's patriotclub.us. Thank you and God bless.